Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Elliot, please go ahead.
Why, thank you, Rochelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Elliot Markowitz, and I'm the Director of Strategic Content here at Summit Business Media, and welcome to today's webcast titled Software Selection, the Same But Different. And this event is brought to you by Tech Decisions and CastleBay Consulting, and sponsored by Zuber Insurance Software, ISCS, Maple Technologies, and Guidewire. This is the second in a three-part webcast series, so we hope it will be valuable to you. I will be the moderator for this event, but before we get to the topic, let's get some simple housekeeping items out of the way first. This event is completely interactive, and we do mean that. It incorporates many of today's social media tools, so you can now tweet or directly post information to your Facebook and or LinkedIn page right from the console. You don't have to open up a new browser to do so. Just scroll along the bottom of the screen, click on the social networking widget of your choice, and have fun with it. We encourage you to share. If you have a question for one of our speakers, please type it in the Ask a Question field on your console, and we'll get to that question either during the event or during the live Q&A at the end of the event, depending on how much time we have. Please don't be shy. We will answer as many questions as possible, so we invite you to ask away and ask often. Also, if you go to the resource widget and click on that, you can download a copy of today's presentation right to your desktop. We usually get a few questions asking how to do so. So again, you can just click on the resource widget, and you can actually download a copy of the entire presentation to your desktop. In addition, there are a few other customizable functions to be aware of. Every window you currently see, and that's from the slide window to the Q&A pane, can either be enlarged or collapsed. So if you want to change the look and feel of your console, go right ahead and do so. And also, there will be some polling questions sprinkled throughout this event. To participate in these polls, just click on the most appropriate response. We will share the overall results with the audience. We won't be singling anybody out, so please participate in the polls. Key factor is the more interactive you are, the more valuable this experience will be for you. So let's get to today's topic and our speakers. For any insurance carrier that decides to buy rather than build software, which is and should be the vast majority, a key fact to understand is that vendors are practiced and skilled at selling software, but insurers are not practiced and skilled at buying it. Core insurance application systems, and that's policy, billing, claims, have a working life of up to about 30 years, so insurance professionals do not regularly shop the market for replacement software. This disparity generates major risks that the insurer needs to mitigate in order to reach a positive result. Software vendors are highly skilled at showing their software in the best possible light while guiding prospects away from those areas of the system which are less compelling. So you have to be aware. This webcast will touch on methodical, strategic, and tactical steps that can be taken to lower the risk of buying from the best sales organization and heighten the likelihood of buying the most appropriate solution for that given insurer's need. Very important. And here with us today to discuss these issues and walk you through it are George Grieve, he's CEO of CastleBay Consulting. We also have Joanne Asawamatiyanun, and I think I got that right. She'll tell me later. She's Vice President of IT at Service Lloyd's Insurance Company. And we have Ken Mitchell. He's Director of IT at Clements Worldwide. But before we officially turn it over to George, let's roll out the first audience polling question. So, Rochelle, if you can push that out, that would be fantastic. And we are simply going to ask you, for audience members that represent carriers or MGAs, there are your responses. Are you planning core system search in the next 12 to 24 months? Click on that if you are. You're currently involved in a core system search. Click on that if you are. Or you completed a core system search in the past 12 to 24 months. So if one of those apply, please click on the most appropriate response. And we're going to give it a couple of seconds. Make sure we give the audience enough time to respond, and then we'll get to the results. And then we'll get to our other speakers as well. So take your time and just click on the most appropriate response. So, Rochelle, if you can now push out the results of that poll quickly, we'll then get to George. And again, we asked for audience members that represent carriers or MGAs. There you go, George. It looks like 68%, they're currently involved in a core system search, almost 20%. Planning a core system search in the next year to two. Just under 13% completed a core system search. Now it's my pleasure to turn over to George Grieve, CEO of CastleBay Consulting. What do you think of those results, George?
Well, that's interesting, and that means that hopefully for the vast majority of you, this is going to be topical and useful. And for those of you that are involved in a current live system search, this will give you a little checkpoint to work forward from. So our topic name today, software selection, same but different. Really, we're trying to get at two things here. First of all, for those of you that joined us on It's Not Your Father's Software Market, the basic argument there was that the software market has changed, and it's changed for the better. And we'll reiterate some of those things in a few moments here. and that indeed there are better choices and there are more choices, but the market is very busy, as shown by the poll result. To more than 2/3 of you are actively involved in a search right now, which means that the vendors are busy. And that means you have to do certain things to attract their attention, and you also have to be probably somewhat more flexible in responding to vendors than you may have been in the past. And that basic assumption that it's a buyer's market is an assumption that we are going to challenge a little bit today. So hence our title. Just to remind you, and we've really already been over this, this is the second of 3 webinars. The first one was Not Your Father's Software Market. This is us today. We're talking about software selection. And our third one, which happens in just over a month's time, concerns implementation. I put these slides up on the last webinar also. I'm not going to dwell on them, but again, you can download these and review these at your leisure, and also go out and find these links on the internet and look at these reports should you wish to do so. But this headline recently came out in a Insurance Networking News headline that only 30% of policy administration projects succeed. We delved into that a little bit on our last webinar. What I want to do is link that result not to implementations, which we will do in our next webinar, but to do with software selection, because one of the things that you need to be sure of, excuse me, and I'm just paging through these to give you a brief look at them. I'm not necessarily talking specifically to them. But clearly, if you don't get the right vendor, it's much harder to do a successful implementation than if you get the right vendor. As importantly, as we'll argue in a moment, it's not only a case of getting the right vendor, it's a case of really knowing what you're getting. The more you know about the vendor before you get into an implementation, the better you can plan the implementation, the better you can price it, the more security you have in your budget, and therefore the greater likelihood that the implementation project itself is actually going to succeed. So on this slide in front of you, again, this is a repeat directly from our last webinar. And I just want to dwell on some of these items for a moment, but I don't want to repeat myself too much. Basically, we characterized, your father's software environment as being one where if you were a personal lines and a commercial lines carrier, or a personal lines and a commercial kind of work comp carrier, you probably had to buy separate systems. We characterized it where the acquisition options were limited and where the implementation options were also limited, and they were limited to rip and replace, and the methodology was waterfall, and the enhancements and maintenance basically were coding. That compared to an environment today where you have more options to solve a lot of cross-line of business issues using one platform from one vendor, where you have more options in terms of how you acquire and pay for the software over time, and where you can, not only rip and replace, but you can component replace, you can best of breed buy and suite implement, or you can suite buy and best of breed implement, which is this best of both notion, where the methodology default is becoming increasingly agile rather than waterfall, which for reasons we did discuss and will return to during our implementation webinar next month, we consider certainly to be a better and more appropriate way of organizing these very large, complex projects. And then enhancement and maintenance is usually done these days via what's called a configuration toolkit rather than by writing computer code. If you follow along from that, we had a series of inhibitors in, let's say, 10 years ago, we had poorly written software. There were fewer vendor choices. We still had either the Y2K looming in front of us or it was a hangover. There was high perceived risk. Competition in our industry was not technology-based. Consumer expectations were low. And the perceived frequency of failures for selection and implementation was high. On the right-hand side, we have a series of enablers these days where the software genuinely is better than it used to be. You have more vendor choices in general. We had the rise of the internet, which brought our industry into much more close communication with our distribution channels and our ultimate customers via technology. We have lower perceived risk. There are people who've come into our industry from the outside in management positions in insurance companies that have demanded technology innovation. Our customer expectations are higher and growing and continuing to grow. And there's a perceived greater frequency of success, although as you saw earlier, it's not necessarily the case that that perception is completely accurate. So what does this mean for us? Well, in terms of a vendor marketplace conclusion, the vendors are better overall. They have better software. You have more acquisition options. There's better pricing and a value proposition. They have better implementation approaches, and vendors try much harder to be better partners than they have ever tried before. So it presumably follows from that then that there's never been a better time to buy third-party software, and we believe that to be the case. The things that are still emerging to do with some of the cloud-based options and the pricing that goes along with that and software as a service, those aspects are still relatively young, and as they mature, I believe I'll be saying the same thing in another 2 or 3 or 4 years, that there's never been a better time to buy software, but it is certainly true today. So we would assume from that then, if you follow that arrow to the left, that it's, we're all going to sail off into the sunset. It's easy to find a vendor. It's easy to do an implementation, and all of the rest of it. Well, not quite, as you would expect. And here's the not quite. So rather than sailing off into the sunset, you as carriers and MGAs, those of you that are actively involved in these searches, have got to do various things. And this is back to this notion that, remember, these vendors are busy people right now. They can be pickier than they could have been in the past. They can dictate their own terms somewhat in a way that they were not capable of doing years ago. So that puts you actually, to an extent, in competition with each other amongst the amongst the carrier community. So you need to be organized and you need to look serious. Calling vendor A and then calling vendor B and then having one demo and then going back to another vendor and then forgetting to call that vendor and then changing your mind and wanting a different demo and then changing some people on your team, those kinds of behaviors are not the kinds of behaviors that are going to get you the attention and the serious interest that you want from the vendors that you're interested in. So you need to be organized. You need to look serious. In our opinion, also, the fact that there are north of 50 vendors in this marketplace these days is not necessarily a good thing. It's something that has to be managed, and it has to be managed early. There may be 50 vendors, but there are not 50 solutions for you. There are maybe 10 or possibly a little more than 10 that you might want to look at seriously, but really you want to find, as soon as you can, the 4 or 5 vendors that really are the likeliest suspects for you, and you want to focus on them as early as you can. You also need to be, and there's various ways of doing that. There are analyst studies. There are all kinds of other people. Those of you in the 60%, talk to the people that have already done this. Talk to other companies you know, network, call the vendors, do those kinds of things. But have a very clear idea of what it is you're looking for, and then go looking for it as actively as you can before you open yourself up to the vendors. Be mindful that the vendors have constraints. We've had instances in the past year or two where vendors have turned around and said, I'm not going to answer that RFP, I'm too busy. And we have literally renegotiated with that vendor and the other vendors to stay consistent to change that document from an expensive RFP to a lighter RFI, assuming that once we get to our single vendor, we can still complete all the data we want from an RFP, but we're going to do it later, and we're going to do it with one guy when the one guy knows it's their deal to lose. So be very mindful of vendor constraints. Follow a methodology, but again, be flexible. If your methodology says the next step is X, and a couple of the vendors say, I don't have time to do X, think about how to mitigate the risk of not doing X, but think of how to keep those vendors involved in your search process. And finally, make the vendors perform. If vendors are on a short list, it's far likelier that they will do things like scripted demos and proofs of concept than if they think they're one of a dozen or 15 vendors. So here's the standard CastleBay software selection roadmap. If you take a look here, what we're saying is, first of all, as early as you can, I mean, this is only the second process box on our chart, in 4 or 5 weeks, try to get to 4 or 5 vendors. That's just a rule of thumb. Once you have 4 or 5 vendors, they'll be a lot more interested in responding to you than if they think they're one of 10 or 20 vendors, because they have to decide where is the best place to put their time and energy, and they have to justify to their own management why they're talking to you rather than talking to somebody else. As soon as they have done some kind of vendor response, which may be an RFP, maybe a short form RFI, you then want to start to make them perform, and this is where this idea of scripted demos comes in. These are use cases which you provide to vendors and have them actually use as a basis for a demonstration when either you visit them or they visit you. It's a great way for you to take control of those kinds of events and manage and drive the agenda and have the vendor talk to things that you care about and you want to know about rather than what they want you to know about. Then down here, when you think you've selected your vendor, which is at that bottom left-hand corner box, there's still some things you don't know about this vendor. They've done the scripted demo, they've visited you, you've visited them, you've talked to some of their customers, you've read literature on them, but you don't know what it's like to work with them. You don't know how they built the scripted demos that you looked at. You don't know if their software will install in your environment, if indeed that's what you want. And so there's various other things you still need to do. And we believe that executing a proof of concept, and this is going to cost you money, is the final risk mitigator. This is a 60 to 90-day exercise usually. It allows you to really get to know who the vendor is. It also allows you to execute that next process box, which is, negotiating a final deal. The more you know about the vendor, the better the deal will be for both you and for the vendor. So by way of conclusion then, in terms of methodology, so first of all, follow a methodology. There's no best way of doing this. The way that I just showed you certainly works, and has worked for 30 or 40 companies in the last few years. But follow a methodology, look and be organized and serious, know where you are, how you got there, what comes next, control the conversation, be consistent, and be able to document and defend your conclusions. But be flexible. Account for vendor differences, learn and change as you go, because you may make certain assumptions in planning this that don't prove to be the case. You're going to learn some things that you might want to incorporate or remove from your process as you go along, and remain consistent and fair. And if you do those things, there's a high likelihood that you'll end up in a very good place. Some final things to remember: there is no perfect solution. The best decision is usually the best compromise. The final choice may be less important than knowing as much as possible about the choice you make. The more you know, the better deal you can make, and you can be more accurate when it comes to estimating the implementation. The worst time to learn unexpected facts about your vendor is during the implementation. In the end, software selection is about mitigating risk and about making sure that you remember at all times that you are responsible as the buyer for understanding what you hear and for digging down and making sure that you're dealing with facts rather than dealing with opinions or dealing with marketing information that's coming to you from a vendor. So that's my piece. Thank you. You're going to hear from 2 people today, one of whom is actively in the middle of a software search, and the other one who recently finished one. So both of them are very fresh. I'm sure some of the things they tell you you're going to agree with, and you may hear some insights that you haven't thought of yourself. So for now, Elliot, thank you.
Well, thank you, George. Fantastic information. Now let's roll out our second audience polling question. So, Rochelle, if you can push that out, that would be appreciated. And we are now going to ask you, for those currently or recently involved in a core system search, and there are your choices, does the overall process make sense to you, or did it? Did you know where in the process you are and why? Did you feel like you have control rather than the vendor had control? Or did you feel you're on track to choose the right vendor solution? And while you vote on that, I want to remind the audience, if you do have a question for one of our presenters, please scroll along. Please just type it in the Ask a Question field in your console. We will see that question, and either during the event or during the live Q&A at the end. we will get to your question and hopefully get it answered for you. So please don't be shy. Type in your question. We already have a queue of a few questions teed up already. So, Rochelle, if you could push out the results of that poll, let's see what the audience said. And there you go. Looks like 55% said the overall process made sense to them. 22% knew where they were in the process and why. 11% for both felt they had control of the vendors or felt they were on track to choosing the right vendor solution. Now, George, how does that align with your experience before we get to our next presenter?
Well, I find it interesting that 55% feel the overall process makes sense, but an awful lot less people, feel that they have control rather than the vendors, and a similar, in fact, the same number, feel that they're on track to choose the right vendor solution. So it's almost, those last two don't seem to go with the first one. It seems to make sense, but you don't seem terribly confident about the outcomes. So anyway, listen along. If we've said anything that helps, that's great. These two folks certainly know what they're talking about. So keep listening, ask questions at the end. Anything we can do to help, that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now let's turn it over to our next presenter. Here is Joanne Asawamatiya-Nunn. I think I did it better the second time, Joanne. Vice President of IT, Service Lloyd's Insurance Company. So take it away, Joanne. Joanne, you still with us? Her line may be on mute, so let's just give her a second.
Hello?
There you go. Your line is mute.
All right. Sorry, guys.
All right. Take it away.
I'm Joanne. I'm with Service Lloyd's. Let me start by just saying we are a very small carrier. I think this year we will probably hit about $80 million in premium, so we are growing. But our background is really that we started out as a direct carrier to auto dealerships and some various P&C lines. As the years went by, they decided that workers' comp was a nice space for them to be in. And in 2000, I was brought in, and they had decided to open up the business to independent agents and slowly move away from being a direct carrier and to stop competing with these agents. And as that started, clearly the software system they had started to get taxed. And what we really had was a system that was written by really two people to begin with, and then over time, two part-time developers. But the workers' comp system here is complete legacy system written in RPG and still sitting on an AS400. And when I got here, the decision, they weren't comfortable looking for a system yet, and what we had developed was just a portal to extend the legacy system, and that's lasted for about 8 years. And so the question came to me as Vice President of IT, what systems are out there for us? And initially, I thought, okay, I might be able to do this on my own. But the more I started looking into it, within a couple of months, I realized, wait a second, this is not like buying regular software, and every vendor keeps telling me something slightly different, and it was very difficult for me to really evaluate all the vendors out there. And in particular, since we were monoline, just workers' comp only, I was really being inundated with a lot of systems that just had too many features and too much that I was not looking for. And it really became difficult for me to see what they were offering and how it matched what we needed. I started out, just doing a lot of research, going to a lot of conferences, insurance conferences, and talking to different technology companies. And this process for me actually started about 2 years ago. And as I was learning about this and what we needed to do to replace our system, I realized I needed a consultant and I needed professional help in this area. And so I started to build a business case, and with our organization here started presenting this business case over the course of 12 months. And first started with the facts of personnel, obviously RPG and the AS400 being an older platform. We were not yet, but we are going to start to have people retire. So I felt like we were going to be proactive in searching for a system while we still had all this brain power still here. And it wasn't just IT people, it was also business people that will be retiring in the next 3, 4, 5 years and more rapidly as the years go on, and really presented the case such as we shouldn't be waiting until it's an emergency, but we should make sure these people are still here to help us find a system, because they know our business, even if they might not be familiar with new technologies that are out there. The main thing was that they knew our business, and that's what we really needed with the help of a consultant to find the right vendor. Another part of the business case that I built was just efficiency. The workflow that we have now is completely based on the system and doesn't really follow with straight-through processing for all the way from scanning, data entry, or data extraction, all the way to underwriting, and then trying to be paperless. That we were being asked to modernize our legacy system by just kind of piecemealing it together, and that was not going to continue to work. And in fact, what was a fairly straightforward, simple legacy system has started to get extremely complicated by trying to modernize it. Which kind of dovetails into the next part about the technology platform, and that with wanting to go mobile and all of these other nice features that CEOs and presidents want, again, just kind of modernizing the legacy system wasn't going to cut it for moving into new technologies. That said, I really needed to get buy-in from the executives, and that took me really another 6 months of, kind of the quarterly executive meetings that we would have, consistently answering questions, asked questions, coming back with more answers. But the culture in our company, considering that we're really small, is such that, without the buy-in, and I mean 100% buy-in from every executive, this wasn't going to work for our company and just the culture that we have here. In addition to that, we are so used to doing things on our own in a small company to a certain extent that using a consultant was also something that the executives weren't quite sure how that was going to work. And I also, as part of, from a marketing, perspective, selling them on this, was really trying to show them that a consultant not only had the expertise that we need, but could mitigate any internal politics and kind of the jockeying and lobbying that can go towards, focusing on claims more versus policy admin, or, forgetting about the accounting department or financial department when it comes to billing and things like that. And that having a consultant would really help keep the IT department out of the politics between the other business units. And that actually was something that over time the executives really started to agree with, that having an expert help us, we would actively be part of managing the projects, but a consultant would really help. The next thing was really then finding the people within our own departments and trying to get all the people together that we would need. And that was actually a little bit guided by the consultant and helping us identify which areas and which people, and then clearly having a handler that could manage the consultant and the project team together. And as we stepped forward, then it became all the data gathering, and our consultant really helped us with that. As a small company with a home-written system, there was zero documentation, and all of our business rules are really embedded in the code. And so the business users really only know how to operate the system, and it's really the IT people and the programmers that have the business knowledge, which is really the kind of the antithesis of these newer systems. Next, we had a steering committee that really set the standards and the criteria for what was important to the company. But we used a core team of subject matter experts and the business users in the company to really do the detail work of identifying what was really important to us in the system. From there, we were able to take that data, and the consultant was helping us analyze all of that and talk to all of our people on the project team to find out what was really important in their areas for the company. From there, they were able to analyze the marketplace and find out which vendors were right for us. And based on a series of filters, we went from, maybe a list of 15 to 20 vendors down to 10. And as the filters keep going through, we ended up getting down to 5. And the great thing about that, too, was so many people that were involved in the project really felt a sense of ownership and a sense that they were being part of the decision to really buy the new software that they are actually going to be the users of. And that was really good for our company and, again, our size, where so many people have never been a part of such a project. Then I guess I could say the real work starts. We took those 5 vendors and sent the RFIs out to them, and what you get back is really a mix and kind of gives you a sense of the vendor as well. Some vendors were extremely detailed and gave us tons of data to sift through, some of it marketing material, some of it really relevant, some of it technical, and it just varied through the vendors. But this is where the real work started. Once we got the RFIs back, we had a matrix that we needed to go through to grade and score each of the vendors. And that, to everybody in our company on the project was really the hardest part, sifting through all the material and trying to find out what was relevant. And, you're always going to have the issue of, we had some people from the claims side that were not comfortable scoring a vendor on underwriting, for example, and vice versa. And so, that's just something to be aware of. It happens sometimes. But what we got out of it was, 3 vendors, and surprisingly, everybody was really in step and was right on. We are now at the next phase of going to analyze and take a step further into the analysis of 3 vendors and do our visits and whatnot. Let me quickly just recap the lessons learned for a company our size, which was huge, is that we needed help. There was no way for us to even begin the process of looking at the marketplace with all the insurance vendors out there to really know what was right for us. And the biggest part, even for me in IT, was just to say, I need help, and how am I going to go out and find that help, and making sure that the company agrees that you need help. Surprisingly, like I said, it took me 2 years to even get to this point. But I'm glad I waited and I didn't force it, because the support that I have now from the executives and now even staff level members in various departments is huge, and I think is going to be vital to our success in implementation and as we get down that road. Overall, I think one of the best things that we learned, and I also think that we can take through to other projects, is what we learned about the selection process for any software or any project that might be transformational to us, and that using the best practices that are out there were really, really helpful. That's all I've got, Elliot. Back to you, and I think we have a poll.
Yeah, well, that's plenty. Great case study. Thank you, Joanne. Michelle, if you could push out the next poll, that would be great. We're now going to ask the audience, for those who completed a core system search in the past 24 months, there are your choices, and you can choose more than one in this poll, so you can choose a combination of respondents. Either looking back, do you still feel you chose the right vendor solution? Have you subsequently learned anything that you wish you had discovered during the selection process? And knowing what you know now, would you make the same vendor solution decision again? And again, unlike the other polls, this poll isn't able to be multi-respondent. So please take a couple seconds and fill that out. All right, Rochelle, if you could push out those results. And there you have it. 66% on both sides says have subsequently learned. They have subsequently learned things that they wish they would have discovered during the selection process, and knowing that what they know now would have made the same vendor solution decision again. Joanne, where would you fit in this poll?
Oh, sorry. I would say that, I mean, we are exactly where we want to be, and we're glad that the 3 vendors that we're down to, I think, are going to be, all of them could be a good fit. And the next part of, these next couple of phases of diving into just the detailed part of their systems, I feel that as we get down to one single vendor ready to go to a proof of concept, as George had pointed out earlier, our knowledge of the vendor in the next couple of months is going to be crucial for us to feel that confidence. I think coming from a small company, just let's be honest here, we're scared. This is our core system. It's running all of our business through it, and we're wanting to make sure that this vendor is going to be a really good fit for us, and diving in deep and not just letting a vendor dictate demos and whatnot is something we're really looking forward to.
Real concerns. Well, thank you for that. Please stay with us for the Q&A during the end of the event. Now let's turn it over to our final speaker. Here with us is also Ken Mitchell. He's Director of IT, Clements Worldwide, and he's going to wrap it up until we get to the Q&A. So take it away, Ken.
Okay, my name is Ken Mitchell, and I'm the Director of IT for Clements Worldwide. I'll give you some background on Clements Worldwide. We are a privately owned MGA that's been in business since 1947. We started with writing State Department employees and diplomats posted abroad, and since then we've moved on to serve any expatriate who's living and working outside of their home country. And we try to be a one-stop shop for these folks, providing solutions for property, auto, life insurance, and also a little bit of health insurance. Over the last decade, we've grown quite a bit in our commercial lines, and right now they comprise over 50% of our business. And our typical commercial lines clients are relief and aid organizations, NGOs, and international schools. To give some examples, we do commercial auto fleets for landmine removal companies in sub-Saharan Africa, and group health for teachers in international schools in Indonesia. So quite a unique business. We write in over 170 countries worldwide, fairly broadly distributed, not really concentrated in any one country. And we're fairly small. We have an annual written premium of around $100 million. So that's some background on us. So I'm going to pick up a little bit where Joanne left off. She got the short list, and now the short list is complete. Now what? And one thing I want to get across is it is a risky proposition. I mean, most of the smaller vendors in the marketplace, they have a higher failure and acquisition risk, and it's an ever-changing landscape. It seems like every 5 years there's a whole new set of players. So about 7 years ago in a past life, I went through a software selection, and our short list was comprised of 3 players. The first vendor choice did not work out. They failed as a vendor, and then we thought to ourselves, geez, we should have picked our second choice. They looked promising. 2 years later, they were off the map. And the third choice, who we gave about a 30% chance of survival long term, 7 years later, they're still a viable company. So it is a risky proposition, and even if you use a textbook approach, if you do shortlist matrices, RFPs, vendor site visits, analyst reports, it's still risky, and that's why it's critical to engage a company like CastleBay, who are wired-in consultants, because they know all the dirty laundry on all of these vendors, And if you go it alone, you're really only going to see the tip of the iceberg, even if you use the textbook approach. And a company like CastleBay will know the rest of the iceberg. So some background on our selection criteria. We wanted a vendor that had a strong implementation track record, 0 failed implementations. And that's important to us because it shows that the vendor is judicious in signing customers and they really value their reputation as strong implementers. And it also shows that that vendor has a strong project management ability to push a client through to production if needed. We wanted a system with flexible modern architecture. Or an MGA, we have very complex needs. We operate in both P&C, life and health, personal and commercial in 170 different countries. We need to move quick to capitalize on new opportunities, and we need to implement compliance and regulatory changes that are pushed down on us from our carriers very quickly. So we need a flexible, modern system. Flexibility is more important to us than functionality. We wanted a vendor who is growing and financially stable. And we wanted a vendor who invests in R&D. It seems with the technology, all technology is about one cycle behind, from being out of date. So a vendor that's investing a lot in R&D at least gives you a fighting chance 10 years from now that you'll still have a relevant modern system. One benchmark that we look for is their R&D budget should be about the same percentage of what their annual maintenance fee is. So typically a vendor will charge about 20% of their license fee as maintenance that's supposed to be there to improve the product. You want to make sure that their R&D budget is on par with that. So once you have your short list done, you have to understand what you're buying, and what you're really buying is a marriage. And this is going to be a 5 to 10 year commitment at least. The technology or the system may be out of style in a few years, but you're still going to be left with a partner that's critical to your company's ongoing success. And a selection matrix only gets you so far. Trust, stability, and fit are critical. Trust is hard to gauge. Probably the best indicator of trust when you're interviewing these vendors is just overall transparency. You want the vendor to tell you no. You don't want them to say yes to everything. You want them to tell you no to both what the system capabilities are and what they're willing to do for you as a client. The vendor we ultimately selected through this process, ISCS out of San Jose, California, they actually invited us to their users group before we bought the system. So that showed a great degree of transparency on them and their system that we felt very comfortable with. So the next step after the short list is usually an RFP, and some key points on the RFP are you want to have use cases for the vendor to walk through with the system. This is kind of what George was talking about before with scripted demos. It's almost like a proof of concept light. You want them to demonstrate and show samples of their implementation tool sets and artifacts. Usually you want to see their spreadsheets, their modeling tools, their questionnaires, everything that's going to help guide clients through the implementation process. Most of the time, strong implementers will also have a strong implementation tool set, and you want to see proof of that tool set. And then you want to include in that RFP some sort of measures of vendor stability and long-term viability. And what to look for there is a strong balance sheet. You want to see ample recurring revenue. You don't want all of their revenue to be dependent on signing up new clients. You want to see a pattern of steady, conservative, and manageable sign-up of new clients. You don't want it to be too hot or too cold. You want to see that investment in R&D, 0 failed implementations, and you want to see positive references. After you send out the RFP to your short list, the next piece is usually the RFP review process, and there timelines and availability matter. You want to make sure that you're not treated like an inconvenience during the courtship process or the marriage with this vendor is not likely to be good long term. You want to bring your team to the vendor's location to go over the RFP, and that's important for a few reasons. One is it's the most efficient way to review the RFP since most of their resources are going to be there to pull into discussions as needed. It'll give you a chance to meet the key members of the vendor team to check their depth beyond just the sales folks and the few other people that you talk to. And if you ultimately select that vendor, it'll build a strong foundation for the relationship going forward. Also, when you're on site, it's important to walk through the use cases that are in the RFP because you want to make sure that the vendor is taking a diligent and thoughtful approach to understanding your business. And you want to see where the system fits and where it doesn't. And where it doesn't fit, you want them to walk through how we can work around it to make it fit. And you also want to discuss with the vendor future plans, both your future plans and their future plans. You want to make sure you're in sync to grow together. For example, if you want to go gangbusters growing in life and health, you want to make sure that their focus isn't going to be ISO homeowners over the next 5 or 10 years. So another piece of the RFP review is reference checks. With references, you want to discuss their implementation processes and whatever lessons they learned there. If you're fortunate enough, you want to be able to visit reference clients and do a site visit so you can actually see the system in live production and get end user feedback from the client references. And then, as I mentioned before, we were fortunate enough to be able to attend a users group before buying a system. If that's available, that's really valuable as well, because you're able to really talk to a lot of their core client base to get real feedback on how they might fit as a partner. And then after you go through the whole short list and you finally pick, the one that you want, the next piece is the contract phase. And some key points on here is you want to make the contract a win-win. You do not want to avoid, you want to avoid squeezing the last dollar out of any deal, because when the choppy waters come, as it will during any implementation, there won't be any goodwill left if you're too tight on the contract. You want to be careful about using incentives and penalties in the contract, because so much of this implementation is dependent on you and your team, and it's at least 50%. You want to avoid any kind of future finger pointing if things start going wrong. You also want to build some reasonable contingency in the contract. That's especially important with agile methodology, since 100% of the requirements are not necessarily known up front. You want to build in for both known future changes. For example, you may have a product change or a rate change in 5 months. You want to build that into the estimate. And you also want to build in for unknown future change orders. And if possible, you also want to build outs into your contract. And one out that's recommended is after a vendor does requirements, if the estimate differs greatly from the estimate they gave you during the RFP process, you may want to build it out into your contract there. So far, we've selected a vendor. We've selected ISCS in late 2012, and we began implementing in late 2012. And so far, the implementation is going well. We're about a third complete the process, and the requirements definition piece is complete, and that was ahead of budget and schedule, which is a good sign for the rest of the implementation. They're about 25% complete software development, and we expect to go live in May 2014. So that's where we are in the process, and I'll pass it back to you, Elliot.
Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you for sharing your situation with us. We obviously appreciate it, and I know it's valuable to the audience as they make their decisions as well. We have a couple of minutes left, so we're going to get into some audience questions for our panelists. But before we do, we're going to roll out just one final poll, and we're going to ask you to please vote on this. So, Rochelle, if you can push out that final poll. This webcast series is going to culminate in a Shop Talk Community 2013 live face-to-face event. We'll be taking a deeper dive into the material that we've discussed in all 3 of the webcasts and podcasts. Space is limited, so we'd like your feedback on if you're interested or would be interested in attending such a live event in Philadelphia on November 12th. Just either hit yes or no. We're not going to share those results. It's just for our purposes only, and we appreciate your feedback. So now let's jump into the audience Q&A with the little time we have left. Joanne, are you still mic'd up?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask Joanne and then maybe Ken to weigh in. First question, how do you choose a consultant to help you with your software search? What's the process of actually choosing the consultant part of it?
Well, for us, the company had never gone through. We've built all of our software, even for other lines of business, so we had never gone through the process. For me, it was just actually familiarizing myself with the industry. So it started with going to conferences and a lot of these types of webinars. What ended up happening was I kept seeing George's name on almost everything I was reading. I kept seeing CastleBay Consulting show up in a lot of different places. And at first I didn't contact them right away. I was looking for local companies to keep costs down and things like that. But the more I started talking to other people, the more I realized I really wanted to talk to CastleBay. And after one conversation, it was, they know what they're talking about and they know what they're doing in our industry. And that was really it for me after CastleBay.
Great. Thank you. Ken, can you walk us through your experience?
Sure. With CastleBay, yeah, we selected CastleBay based on. I'm sorry.
Well, how you even got to select them, basically.
How we got to select them, we knew we needed help. We needed someone who was really wired into the industry. We knew CastleBay was very wired in. We had saw them in numerous conferences for numerous years, in numerous publications. I mean, they definitely seemed like the key player in the industry, so that was naturally our first choice.
Excellent. Ken, let me stay with you. What did you find to be the most difficult part of the software selection process?
Really, for us, the difficulty is just finding available vendors who can do what we do. We write in different lines of business, both commercial and personal lines, and we're an MGA that has complex carrier reporting requirements and carrier assignment rules. So there really wasn't a wide net to really cast. There was only a few vendors who could do what we were looking for anyway, so it's really just that was our main challenge.
Okay, very good. And George, you mic'd up, still with us?
Yes, I am.
Great. Let me pose the next question to you. You said that about 30% of policy admin projects succeed. What would you say is the number one criteria to look for in an implementation partner to make sure that, you're in that 30% range?
Well, every carrier ends up with a somewhat different set of core criteria for selecting a vendor. One of those criteria should reflect the vendor's ability to do implementation projects, their implementation track record, and their implementation track record with companies